The scream never came. 6-year-old Stella Valentino slipped under the restaurant table like a shadow, her small body trembling as two strangers entered through the back door. The sound of heavy footsteps sent her deeper into the darkness beneath the booth, her wide eyes reflecting pure terror. Above her, the most feared man on the East Coast sat frozen. Augusto Valentino, the boss who made grown men beg for mercy, couldn't reach his own daughter. Every time he tried to coax her out, she shrank further away, as if even his voice carried danger. The Riverside diner fell silent. Customers fled. His men reached for their weapons. But then a young Latina waitress with tired eyes and gentle hands did something no one expected. She knelt down slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Stella, you're safe, I promise. I'm Camilla. I'm just here to help, okay?" For the first time since her mother's death, Stella stopped trembling. Augusto watched in stunned silence as his daughter, who rejected every nanny, every therapist, every attempt at comfort, reached out and took the waitress's hand. Everything was about to change. The rain fell on Manhattan like whispered secrets, each drop carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Camilla Costa pulled her thin jacket tighter as she hurried down the sidewalk toward the Riverside diner, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs of a city that never slept. 25 years old, and already exhausted by life, Camilla carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to survive on hope and determination alone. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes held depths that spoke of struggles she never discussed with anyone. The diner's bell chimed as she pushed through the glass door, the familiar scent of coffee and bacon grease wrapping around her like a worn blanket. This place had become her sanctuary, the one constant in a life that seemed to shift beneath her feet like quicksand. "You're late, Mija," called Betty from behind the grill, her weathered face creasing into a knowing smile. The older woman had worked at the Riverside for 30 years, and her maternal instincts had adopted every young waitress who walked through those doors. "Sorry, Betty, the subway was delayed again." Camilla tied her apron around her waist, checking her reflection in the chrome surface of the coffee machine. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of another sleepless night in the cramped apartment she shared with 2 other girls, where the walls were so thin she could hear every conversation, every argument, every sob. The diner was unusually quiet for a Tuesday evening. A few regulars sat at the counter, nursing coffee that had grown cold hours ago, while rain streaked the windows in patterns that looked like tears. Camilla had just finished refilling the sugar dispensers when the atmosphere changed. It started with the silence, the kind of heavy, expectant quiet that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The bell above the door chimed, but this time it sounded different. Ominous. 3 men in expensive suits entered, their movements precise and predatory. They didn't look around like normal customers. They surveyed the space like generals planning a conquest. Behind them came a man who commanded attention without saying a word. Augusto Valentino stood 6'3" with the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his olive skin stretched over sharp cheekbones that could have been carved from marble. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the top 4 buttons undone, revealing a muscular chest and a discreet wolf tattoo on the side of his neck. A platinum Rolex Daytona caught the light as he moved, each gesture calculated and controlled. But it was his eyes that stopped Camilla's breath, dark brown, almost black, holding secrets that could destroy lives and build empires. Beside him, barely reaching his waist, walked a little girl. Stella Valentino was 6 years old, but carried herself like someone much older, as if the weight of the world rested on her tiny shoulders. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around a face that would have been beautiful if not for the haunted expression in her green eyes. She wore an expensive little coat that probably cost more than Camilla made in a month, but she clutched it around herself like armor. The child hadn't spoken a word since her mother's death 6 months ago. Augusto guided his daughter to a corner booth, his men positioning themselves strategically around the diner. The few remaining customers seemed to sense the shift in energy. Within minutes, the Riverside was nearly empty, except for the staff and the dangerous men in suits. Camilla approached their table with practiced professionalism, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard whispers about Augusto Valentino, Everyone in the city had. He was the head of the most powerful crime family on the East Coast, a man who could end lives with a phone call and had built an empire on fear and respect. "Good evening," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can I get you something to drink?" Augusto's gaze lifted to meet hers, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see straight through to her soul. "Coffee. Black," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "And milk for her." Stella sat pressed against the window, staring out at the rain with the same expression Camilla had seen on her own face too many times, the look of someone trying to disappear. As Camilla turned to get their drinks, the diner's back door suddenly burst open. Two men she didn't recognize entered, their voices loud and aggressive as they argued about something. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the space like a gunshot. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Stella's face went white as paper. Her small body began to shake, and before anyone could react, she slipped down from the booth and disappeared under the table. The silence that followed was deafening. Augusto's expression shifted from controlled calm to something raw and desperate. He immediately crouched down, trying to reach for his daughter, but Stella pressed herself against the far corner under the table, as far from his hands as possible. "Stella, sweetheart, it's okay," Augusto said, his voice gentler than Camilla would have thought possible from such a dangerous man. "It's just Daddy. You're safe." But the little girl only curled into a tighter ball, her breathing rapid and shallow. His men tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The two strangers who had entered through the back door froze, suddenly aware they had walked into something far more serious than they'd anticipated. Camilla watched the scene unfold with her heart breaking. She recognized that look in Stella's eyes, the terror of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and couldn't find their way back to feeling safe. Without thinking, without considering the consequences of interfering with a man like Augusto Valentino, Camilla set down the coffee pot and slowly approached the table. Augusto looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with a pain so deep it took her breath away. This wasn't the cold, calculating crime boss she'd expected. This was a father watching his child suffer and feeling completely powerless to help. "May I?" Camilla asked softly, gesturing toward the table. Augusto hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping back to give her space. Camilla knelt down beside the booth, making herself small and non-threatening. She could see Stella huddled in the corner, her little body shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Stella," she whispered, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. "You're safe, I promise. I'm Camilla. I'm just here to help, okay?" The little girl's eyes met hers through the darkness under the table. Green, meeting, brown in a moment that felt like destiny. "I know you're scared," Camilla continued, extending her hand but not reaching for the child. "But nobody here is going to hurt you. Not your daddy, not me, not anyone. You're safe." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Stella's trembling hand reached out and touched Camilla's fingertips. The contact was electric, not romantic, but something deeper. Recognition, trust, hope. Augusto watched from above, his breath caught in his throat as his daughter, who hadn't allowed anyone to touch her in months, slowly crawled toward the waitress and into her arms. As Camilla lifted Stella from under the table, cradling her against her chest, the little girl buried her face in her shoulder, and for the first time since her mother's death stopped shaking. The most powerful man in New York stood frozen, watching a minimum-wage waitress accomplish what teams of expensive therapists couldn't. And in that moment, everything changed. 3 days later, Augusto Valentino sat in his black Bentley outside the Riverside Diner, watching through rain-streaked windows as Camilla moved between tables with practiced efficiency. His platinum Rolex showed 11:47 p.m., well past closing time, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Stella sat beside him in her car seat, finally calm after another sleepless night. She'd been asking for the nice lady every day since their encounter, using gestures and drawings, since words still wouldn't come. "Boss?" Nico's voice came through the car's intercom. His lieutenant sat in the passenger seat, concern evident in his weathered features. We should go, people will start talking. Augusto's jaw tightened. People were already talking. The head of the Valentino family spending his evenings outside a rundown diner in Queens was exactly the kind of behavior that made enemies think he was going soft. But when Stella had nightmares, which was every night, the only thing that calmed her was drawing pictures of the woman who had knelt beside her in the darkness. 5 more minutes, Augusto said, his eyes never leaving Camilla's figure as she wiped down tables. Through the diner's windows he watched her laugh at something Betty said. The sound didn't reach him through the glass, but he could see the way her whole face lit up, transforming her from tired and worn to radiant. It was the first genuine smile he'd witnessed in months, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother, Francesca. "Bring Stella for Sunday dinner. She needs family." Augusto deleted the message without responding. His mother meant well, but her version of helping involved hiring more nannies, more therapists, more strangers who looked at Stella like she was broken. The diner's lights flickered off one by one. Camilla emerged through the back door, pulling her thin jacket tight against the October chill. She walked to the bus stop with quick, nervous steps, a young woman alone on dark streets, vulnerable in ways that made Augusto's protective instincts flare. "Follow her," he told Nico quietly. "Boss, make sure she gets home safe. Don't let her see you." Nico nodded and slipped out of the car, disappearing into the shadows with the practiced stealth of a man who'd spent 20 years protecting the Valentino family. Augusto started the engine, but instead of heading home to his penthouse, he drove to the office. Sleep wouldn't come anyway. It rarely did anymore. Not since Elena's death had left him with a traumatized daughter and no idea how to be the father she needed. The next evening, Augusto found himself back at the Riverside Diner. This time he brought Stella inside. Camilla looked up from the coffee machine as they entered, and her face immediately softened when she saw the little girl. "Well, hello there, beautiful," she said, crouching down to Stella's eye level. "How are you feeling today?" Stella didn't speak, but she stepped closer to Camilla, reaching out to touch the small silver cross that hung around her neck. "You like my necklace?" Camilla asked gently. "My grandmother gave it to me before she passed away. She said it would keep me safe." Augusto watched the interaction with fascination. Stella had always been drawn to shiny objects, but she'd never approached strangers voluntarily, not since the accident. "Table for 2?" Camilla asked, straightening to meet Augusto's gaze. "Please." His voice came out rougher than intended. Up close, she was even more beautiful than he'd realized, not in the polished, artificial way of the women who usually surrounded him, but with a natural warmth that seemed to radiate from within. She led them to the same corner booth, and Stella immediately climbed up beside Camilla instead of sitting across from her father. "I hope that's okay," Camilla said, looking uncertain for the first time. "It's perfect," Augusto replied, and meant it. Seeing his daughter seek comfort from anyone was a miracle he'd stopped believing in. As the evening progressed, Augusto found himself studying Camilla with the same intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations. She moved with quiet grace, treating every customer, from the homeless man nursing a single cup of coffee to the well-dressed couple celebrating an anniversary, with equal kindness and respect. When she brought Stella a coloring book and crayons without being asked, the little girl's face lit up with something that looked almost like joy. "You're good with children," Augusto observed. Camilla's smile faltered slightly. "I've always loved kids. I wanted to be a teacher once." "What happened?" She was quiet for a moment, refilling his coffee cup with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Life happened. Immigration status, student loans, family obligations. Sometimes dreams have to wait." There was pain in her voice, the kind that came from sacrificing pieces of yourself to survive. Augusto recognized it because he'd felt it himself, watching his daughter slip further away each day, while he remained powerless to help. "Stella seems comfortable with you," he said carefully. "She's special." Camilla glanced down at the little girl, who was coloring intently. "She just needs someone who understands that healing takes time." The simple statement hit Augusto like a physical blow. Every therapist, every specialist he'd consulted had focused on timelines and milestones, treating Stella's trauma like a problem to be solved, rather than a wound that needed gentle care. "How do you know?" he asked. Camilla's brown eyes met his, and for a moment he saw past her carefully maintained composure to the hurt she carried. "Because I've been there. Maybe not exactly the same situation, but I know what it's like to feel like the world isn't safe anymore." Before Augusto could respond, the diner's bell chimed aggressively. 3 men entered, not his men, but strangers with the kind of swagger that meant trouble. Their leader, a man with gold teeth and expensive sneakers, surveyed the nearly empty restaurant with predatory interest. Augusto's hand moved instinctively toward the gun, concealed beneath his jacket, but Stella's presence stopped him. He couldn't risk exposing her to violence, not when she was finally starting to heal. The men approached their table with deliberate intimidation. "Well, well," the leader said, his voice carrying a thick Brooklyn accent. "Augusto Valentino, heard you've been spending a lot of time in this neighborhood lately." "Gentlemen," Augusto replied, his voice deadly calm, "you're interrupting a private dinner. That's the thing, though. This ain't your territory. Victor Kozlov wants to know why you're sniffing around his businesses." At the mention of Victor's name, Augusto's blood turned to ice. Victor Kozlov was a rival who'd been testing boundaries for months, looking for any sign of weakness in the Valentino operation. Stella pressed closer to Camilla, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. "This is a public establishment," Augusto said evenly. "I'm here as a customer, nothing more." The man with gold teeth smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See, that's where you're wrong. Everything in this neighborhood belongs to Victor now, including this pretty little diner." He let his gaze linger on Camilla in a way that made Augusto's vision go red around the edges. And everyone in it. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Augusto felt Stella's small hand grab onto Camilla's arm, and something inside him snapped into crystal-clear focus. "I think," Augusto said, standing slowly to his full height, "there's been a misunderstanding." His men materialized from the shadows outside, Nico and Diego moving through the front door, while 2 others blocked the back exit. The restaurant suddenly felt very small and very dangerous. "The only misunderstanding," Augusto continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "is thinking you can walk into my presence and threaten what's mine." The man with gold teeth reached for something inside his jacket, but Nico was faster. In seconds, all 3 intruders were on the ground, disarmed and bleeding. "Clean this up," Augusto told his men without taking his eyes off Stella and Camilla, quietly. As his men dragged the unconscious intruders toward the back door, Augusto turned to find Camilla staring at him with wide eyes, her arms protectively wrapped around Stella. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. "Are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Stella looked up at Camilla, then at her father, and for the first time in 6 months she spoke. "Daddy," she whispered, the word so soft it was almost lost in the silence. "Is Camilla safe?" Augusto's heart stopped, his daughter's first word in half a year, and it was about protecting someone else. "Yes, baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Camilla is safe, I promise." But as he looked into Camilla's frightened eyes, Augusto realized that keeping that promise might be the most dangerous thing he'd ever attempted. Because in his world, nothing precious ever stayed safe for long. The next morning brought consequences. Augusto stood in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, his white dress shirt wrinkled from a sleepless night. The wolf tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with each heartbeat as he stared out at the city he controlled, or thought he did. "Victor's making moves," Nico reported from the leather chair across from his desk. 3 of our shipments intercepted in the last week. He's testing us." "And last night? His boys are in the hospital. They'll live. But they got the message." Nico paused, studying his boss's profile. "Augusto, we need to talk about the girl. Her name is Camilla. The waitress, then. Victor knows about her now. He knows Stella was there." Augusto's hands clenched into fists. The platinum Rolex on his wrist caught the morning light as he turned from the window. "Increase security around the diner. I want eyes on Camilla 24/7. "Boss!" That's an order. Nico sighed. You're getting attached. That's dangerous for everyone involved. Before Augusto could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your daughter is beautiful. Would hate for something to happen to her. Or her new friend. The phone cracked in Augusto's grip. Across town, Camilla was having her own crisis. She sat in the tiny kitchen of her shared apartment, staring at the business card Augusto had slipped her the night before. Valentino Enterprises was embossed in elegant gold lettering, with a phone number written in his strong handwriting on the back. You're playing with fire, Mika, Lucia warned from across the table. Her roommate and fellow waitress had been unusually quiet since Camilla told her about the previous night's events. I'm not playing with anything, Camilla protested. That little girl needs help. That little girl's father is a killer. Lucia's voice was sharp with fear. My cousin works construction in Brooklyn. He says the Valentino name makes grown men cross themselves. Camilla touched the silver cross at her throat, the same one Stella had admired. She's just a child, Lucia. She's been through something terrible. And you think you can fix her. You can barely fix your own life. The words stung because they held truth. Camilla worked 60-hour weeks just to afford her share of the cramped apartment. Her dreams of teaching had died under the weight of student loans and immigration paperwork. She was nobody special, just another struggling Latina trying to survive in a city that chewed up the weak. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel Stella's small hand in hers, could still see the hope that had flickered in those green eyes. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Costa. This is Dr. Rachel Martinez from Manhattan Children's Hospital. I understand you've been spending time with Stella Valentino. Camilla's blood ran cold. How did you get this number? Mr. Valentino gave it to me. I've been treating Stella since her mother's death. I was wondering if we could meet. There's something I need to discuss with you. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown, far from both the diner and Augusto's world. Dr. Rachel was a petite woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much childhood trauma. Stella spoke yesterday, she said without preamble, her first words in 6 months. Camilla's heart leaped. That's wonderful. It is, but it's also concerning. Dr. Rachel stirred her coffee slowly. Stella has formed what we call a trauma bond with you. It's not uncommon for children who've experienced loss to attach to someone who makes them feel safe. Isn't that good? It can be, but it can also be dangerous if that person isn't equipped to handle the responsibility. The doctor's gaze was direct but not unkind. Camilla, may I ask about your background with children? I don't have formal training, if that's what you mean, but I've always been good with kids. I have younger siblings back home and She stopped, realizing how inadequate that sounded. What happened to Stella's mother? Dr. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Car accident. Stella was in the vehicle. She watched her mother die and couldn't get help because the doors were jammed. She was trapped with the body for 3 hours before rescue arrived. The coffee cup slipped from Camilla's hands, shattering on the floor. The sound echoed through the cafe like a gunshot, and suddenly she was back in her own childhood, hiding in a closet while her father's drunken rage destroyed everything in sight. I'm sorry, Dr. Rachel said gently. I can see this affects you personally. Camilla knelt to clean up the broken ceramic, her hands shaking. My father. He wasn't a good man. I know what it's like to feel unsafe in your own home. Is that why you responded so naturally to Stella? Maybe. Camilla sat back down, wrapping her arms around herself. When I saw her hiding under that table, I knew exactly what she was feeling. The thing is, Camilla, Stella's attachment to you is already very strong. If you're not prepared to be a consistent presence in her life, it could do more harm than good. What are you saying? I'm saying that Mr. Valentino is going to ask you to help with Stella's care. And before you answer, you need to understand what you'd be walking into. Dr. Rachel leaned forward, her expression serious. Augusto Valentino isn't just wealthy, Camilla. He's dangerous. His world is violent, unpredictable, and unforgiving. If you become important to Stella, you become a target. Are you prepared for that? Before Camilla could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Pretty girls shouldn't walk alone at night. especially ones who matter to the wrong people. The blood drained from her face. Dr. Rachel saw her expression and sighed. It's already started, hasn't it? That evening, Camilla arrived at work to find the Riverside diner, surrounded by men in expensive suits. They weren't threatening, just present, like well-dressed statues positioned at every entrance and exit. Augusto sat in his usual booth with Stella, but something was different. His dark eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before, and his posture radiated barely contained violence. "We need to talk," he said as she approached. Camilla glanced around the diner. Betty was working the grill with nervous efficiency, while the few customers ate in unusual silence. "About what?" "About the fact that you're in danger because of me." Stella looked up from her coloring book, sensing the tension. She reached for Camilla's hand, and the simple gesture made Augusto's jaw tighten. "I can protect myself," Camilla said, though her voice lacked conviction. "No, you can't." Augusto's tone was flat, final. "Victor Kozlov has decided you're a weakness he can exploit. That makes you a target. Then maybe I should stay away." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Stella's crayon stopped moving, and her green eyes filled with the kind of panic Camilla had seen under the table. "No," Augusto said quietly. "It's too late for that. He's already marked you. The only way to keep you safe now is to keep you close." "What does that mean?" Augusto's dark eyes met hers, and she saw something that terrified her more than any threat, genuine care mixed with deadly determination. "It means you're coming home with us, tonight." "I can't just—" "Stella needs you," he interrupted. "And whether you like it or not, you need my protection. Victor won't stop until he's used you to hurt me, and I won't let that happen." Camilla looked down at Stella, who was gripping her hand like a lifeline. The little girl's eyes pleaded silently, not just for safety, but for the one person who made her feel whole. "How long?" Camilla whispered. "Until Victor is no longer a threat." "And if I say no?" Augusto's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Then you'll be dead within a week, and Stella will blame herself for the rest of her life." The brutal honesty hit her like a physical blow, but as she looked at the little girl who had spoken her first words in months, just to ask if Camilla was safe, she realized the choice had already been made. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll come with you." Augusto nodded once. Relief and something else, something that looked almost like gratitude, crossing his features. "Nico will take you to get your things. You'll stay in the guest wing of my penthouse until this is over." As they prepared to leave, Stella tugged on Camilla's sleeve and whispered, so softly only she could hear, "Thank you for staying." And in that moment, Camilla realized she wasn't just protecting a traumatized child anymore. She was falling into a world where love and violence walked hand in hand, and there might be no way back. Augusto's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a Manhattan high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city below. As the private elevator opened into the main living area, Camilla felt like she'd stepped into another world, one of marble floors, Italian leather furniture, and artwork that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime. "This is beautiful," she breathed, unable to hide her awe. "It's a fortress," Augusto corrected, his voice flat. "Bulletproof glass, reinforced steel, security systems that would make the Pentagon jealous. Nothing gets in or out without my permission." Stella ran ahead, her small footsteps echoing through the vast space as she headed toward a spiral staircase that led to the upper levels. "The guest wing is on the 2nd floor, Augusto said, guiding Camilla toward another staircase. "You'll have privacy, but my men will be posted outside for your protection." "You mean to keep me from leaving?" He stopped walking and turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. "If you want to leave, Camilla, you can. But if you walk out that door, you're on your own. Victor's people are watching every move you make." The weight of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. 3 days ago, she'd been a struggling waitress worried about making rent. Now she was living in a crime boss's penthouse, under protection from enemies she'd never met. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Augusto was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the staircase where Stella had disappeared. Because for the first time in 6 months my daughter is sleeping through the night, because she's eating without being forced, because she spoke. He turned back to Camilla, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. Because you gave me back my little girl, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect the people who matter to her. The guest suite was larger than Camilla's entire apartment, with a king-sized bed, sitting area, and bathroom that featured a marble tub big enough for 3 people. Her few belongings looked lost in the enormous walk-in closet. A soft knock on the door interrupted her unpacking. "Come in." Stella peeked around the doorframe, still wearing the pink pajamas she'd changed into after dinner. In her arms was a stuffed elephant that looked well-loved and slightly worn. "Can't sleep?" Camilla asked gently. The little girl shook her head and padded across the room in bare feet. She climbed onto the bed and settled beside Camilla, clutching her elephant. "What's your friend's name?" Camilla asked, gesturing to the stuffed animal. "Peanut," Stella whispered. "Mommy gave him to me." It was the first time Stella had mentioned her mother directly. Camilla felt the weight of the moment and chose her words carefully. "He's very special then. I bet your mommy loved you very much." Stella nodded, her green eyes filling with tears. "She said Peanut would keep me safe when she couldn't." Camilla's heart broke for this little girl who'd lost so much. "And he has, hasn't he? He's been taking very good care of you." "But I want Mommy back." The simple statement, delivered with such raw honesty, brought tears to Camilla's eyes. "I know, sweetheart, I know you do." "Daddy cries sometimes," Stella continued in her whisper-soft voice. "He thinks I don't see, but I do. He misses Mommy too." Camilla glanced toward the door, wondering if Augusto was somewhere in this vast penthouse, carrying his grief in solitude the way powerful men were taught to do. "It's okay to miss people we love," Camilla said softly. "And it's okay to be sad. But you know what?" Stella looked up at her with curious eyes. "Your mummy wouldn't want you to stop living. She'd want you to be happy, to laugh, to make friends. She'd want you to know that even though she's not here anymore, the love she gave you is still inside your heart." Stella was quiet for a long time, processing this. Finally, she snuggled closer to Camilla and whispered, "Will you stay with me tonight?" "Of course." As Stella drifted off to sleep, Camilla found herself staring out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Viktor Kozlov was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives without bodyguards or bulletproof glass. But here, in this moment, with a traumatized little girl sleeping peacefully beside her, Camilla realized she wouldn't trade places with any of them. She woke to the sound of raised voices coming from downstairs. The bedside clock showed 2:17 a.m. Stella was still sleeping, her small hand clutched around Peanut. Carefully extricating herself from the bed, Camilla crept to the door and opened it slightly. The voices were clearer now. Augusto and another man, their conversation heated but controlled. "3 more of our operations hit tonight," the other voice was saying. "He's moving faster than we anticipated." "Then we move faster," Augusto replied, his tone deadly calm. "Double the security on all our holdings, and I want Victor's location within 24 hours. Boss, maybe it's time to consider..." "Consider what, Nico?" "Sending the girl away, and the waitress. Get them somewhere safe while we handle this." There was a long pause. When Augusto spoke again, his voice was so quiet Camilla had to strain to hear it. "Stella won't go. She's barely started talking again, barely started trusting. If I send Camilla away now, it'll destroy her. And if Victor gets to them, he won't." The finality in Augusto's voice sent a chill down Camilla's spine. She was about to close the door when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, she slipped back into bed, pulling the covers up just as the door opened slightly. Augusto's silhouette appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, watching his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in months. His gaze shifted to Camilla, and even in the darkness, she could feel the intensity of his stare. After what felt like an eternity, he quietly closed the door. The next morning brought a new reality. The penthouse was crawling with security, men in suits positioned at every entrance, others monitoring banks of screens that showed feeds from cameras throughout the building. "Good morning," Augusto said as Camilla entered the kitchen with Stella. He was already dressed in a fresh white shirt, the wolf tattoo on his neck visible above the unbuttoned collar. His platinum Rolex caught the morning light as he poured coffee from an expensive-looking machine. "Did you sleep well?" "Eventually." Camilla accepted the cup he offered, noting the way his fingers brushed hers during the exchange. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system. Stella climbed onto a bar stool at the marble island, swinging her legs as she waited for breakfast. "Can Camilla take me to school today?" Augusto's expression tightened. "You're not going to school today, baby, or for a while." "Why not? How do you explain to a 6-year-old that she can't go to school because dangerous men might try to hurt her to get to her father?" "Because we're going to have some special time at home," Camilla interjected smoothly. "We can do art projects, read stories, maybe bake cookies." Stella's face lit up. "Can we make chocolate chip cookies like Mommy used to?" The question hit Augusto like a physical blow. Camilla saw his jaw tighten, saw the pain flash across his features before he could hide it. "I'd love to," Camilla said gently, "but you'll have to help me because I bet your mommy made the best cookies in the world." "She did," Stella said with absolute certainty. "She put extra chocolate chips in mine because she said I was extra sweet." Augusto turned away, ostensibly to refill his coffee, but Camilla caught the way his shoulders tensed. This man who commanded fear and respect from hardened criminals was being undone by his 6-year-old daughter's memories. "Mr. Valentino," she said quietly, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" He nodded, leading her to a study lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. The moment the door closed, the careful control he maintained cracked slightly. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice raw. "Every time she mentions Elena, I feel like I'm drowning. How am I supposed to help her heal when I can't even—" "You're doing better than you think," Camilla interrupted. "She feels safe with you. She trusts you. That's everything. She trusts you more." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. "She needs both of us," Camilla said finally. "You're her father. You're her anchor, her safety, her whole world. I'm just someone who understands what it feels like to be afraid." Augusto stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken. "You're not just anything, Camilla, you're—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "You're the first good thing that's happened to us since Elena died." The intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. For a moment, the space between them felt charged with possibility, with a connection that went far beyond their shared concern for Stella. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Augusto glanced at the screen and his expression went cold. "Victor wants to meet." "What does that mean?" "It means he's ready to make his demands." Augusto's voice was deadly calm. "And it means this is about to get much worse before it gets better." As if summoned by his words, Nico appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Boss, we've got a problem. Victor's people just grabbed Dr. Rachel." The abandoned warehouse in Queens felt like stepping into hell. Augusto moved through the shadows with deadly precision, his men flanking him as they approached the building where Victor Kozlov waited. The platinum Rolex on his wrist showed 11:43 p.m., 13 hours since Dr. Rachel had been taken. 13 hours of Camilla pacing the penthouse, terrified that she was the reason an innocent woman had been kidnapped. 13 hours of Stella, asking why everyone looked so scared. 13 hours of Augusto planning exactly how he was going to end Victor Kozlov's life. "Remember," he told Nico quietly as they reached the entrance, "Dr. Rachel walks out alive, no matter what happens to me." "Boss?" "That's an order." Inside the warehouse, Victor waited in the center of a circle of armed men. He was younger than Augusto expected, maybe 35, with the kind of sharp features and cold eyes that spoke of a man who'd climbed to power over the bodies of his enemies. Dr. Rachel sat tied to a chair beside him, her face bruised but her eyes defiant. "Augusto Valentino," Victor said, his Russian accent thick with mockery. "The great family man, how touching that you'd come personally." "Let her go," Augusto said simply. "Your fight is with me." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong." Victor circled the chair like a predator. "My fight is with everything you care about. Your business, your reputation, your family." He stopped behind Dr. Rachel, placing his hands on her shoulders in a gesture that made Augusto's vision go red. Your daughter's doctor. Your daughter's... What would you call her? Nanny. Guardian angel. What do you want? Victor smiled, and it was the most chilling expression Augusto had ever seen. I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything, the way I lost everything when your father destroyed my family 20 years ago. The words hit Augusto like a physical blow. 20 years ago he'd been 19, just learning the family business under his father's guidance. The Kozlov operation had been small but growing, until Vincent Valentino had decided they were becoming too much of a threat. Your father killed my parents, Victor continued, his voice deadly quiet. Burned down our home with them inside while I watched from across the street. I've spent 20 years building the power to make you pay for that. My father's been dead for 10 years, Augusto said. This ends with me. No, Victor shook his head. This ends with you watching everyone you love die, starting with the good doctor here. He pulled out a gun, pressing it to Dr. Rachel's temple. Then your precious waitress, then your daughter. The threat to Stella broke something fundamental inside Augusto. The careful control he'd maintained his entire adult life shattered like glass. You touch my daughter, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, and I will burn this entire city to the ground to find you. Touching words, but you're in no position to make threats. Victor's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, but it wasn't Victor who fired. Nico's bullet caught the Russian in the shoulder, spinning him away from Dr. Rachel as chaos erupted. Augusto's men moved with practiced efficiency, taking down Victor's soldiers in a coordinated assault that lasted less than 30 seconds. When the gunfire stopped, Victor lay bleeding on the concrete floor, his weapon scattered beyond reach. Augusto approached slowly, his own gun drawn but not aimed. He knelt beside the man who'd terrorized his family for months. My father was a hard man, he said quietly. He did things I wouldn't do, made choices I wouldn't make, but you know what the difference is between him and me. Victor glared up at him, clutching his wounded shoulder. He would have killed your entire bloodline to end this threat. I'm going to give you a choice. Augusto stood, holstering his weapon. You can disappear tonight. Leave New York, leave the East Coast, leave the country if you're smart. Or you can keep coming after my family, and I'll show you exactly what Vincent Valentino's son is capable of when someone threatens his daughter. You think this is over? Victor spat. You think... I think, Augusto interrupted, that you're a dead man if I see you again. The only question is whether you're smart enough to stay that way. He turned to Nico. Make sure Dr. Rachel gets to a hospital, then make sure Mr. Kozlov gets to the airport. And if he doesn't want to go, Augusto's smile was colder than winter, then make sure he doesn't have a choice. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan when Augusto finally returned to the penthouse. He found Camilla in the kitchen, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. Dark circles under her eyes from a sleepless night. Is she safe? Camilla asked immediately. Dr. Rachel is fine. She's at the hospital being checked out, but her injuries aren't serious. Relief flooded Camilla's features. And Victor? No longer a problem. Augusto poured himself a cup of coffee with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be after the night he'd had. The wolf tattoo on his neck seemed darker in the morning light, a reminder of the violence that was always just beneath his civilized surface. What does that mean for us? Camilla asked quietly. It means you're safe. It means Stella can go back to school, back to her normal life. And me? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had been ready to face until now. Augusto set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. That depends on what you want. I want to know if this was all just about protecting Stella. Her directness caught him off guard. In his world, people rarely asked for truth so plainly. At first, he admitted, but somewhere along the way it became about protecting you too. Because of Stella. Because of you. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Augusto, she said softly, I'm nobody special. I'm a waitress from Queens who can barely pay her rent. You're you. This doesn't make sense. He stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. You want to know what makes sense? He asked. For 6 months, I watched my daughter disappear a little more each day. I hired the best therapists, the most expensive specialists, tried everything money could buy. Nothing worked. He reached up, gently touching her face with fingers that had held guns and signed death warrants, but trembled slightly against her skin. Then you knelt down beside a table in a diner and gave her back to me. You made her feel safe when I couldn't. You made her laugh when I thought she'd forgotten how. That's not... You made me remember what it felt like to hope, he continued. What it felt like to believe that maybe we could be okay again. Camilla's breath caught as he stepped even closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. So no, it doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense. But I don't care anymore. Augusto, I'm in love with you, Camilla. I'm in love with your kindness, your strength, the way you see the good in people even when they don't deserve it. I'm in love with the way you make my daughter smile and the way you make me want to be a better man. The confession hung between them like a live wire. I can't ask you to stay in this world, he continued. I can't ask you to accept the danger, the violence, the constant threat that comes with being part of my life. But I can ask you this. Do you feel anything for me? Anything at all? Camilla's answer came not in words, but in action. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring 6 months of denied feelings into the contact. His arms came around her immediately, holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world, because she was. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Camilla whispered against his lips, I love you too. God help me, I love you too. From the doorway came a small, delighted gasp. They turned to find Stella standing there in her pajamas, Peanut clutched in her arms, her green eyes bright with joy. Does this mean Camilla is staying forever? She asked. Augusto looked down at the woman in his arms, the woman who'd saved his daughter and stolen his heart, and smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. If she'll have us, he said. Camilla looked from him to Stella, this little girl who'd become so precious to her, and knew there was only one answer she could give. Forever, she whispered. And as Stella ran to them, wrapping her small arms around both of them, Augusto realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing a man could do was exactly what he needed most. He'd found his family, and he was never letting them go. 2 years later. The Riverside Diner had been transformed. What was once a simple neighborhood restaurant was now an upscale family establishment, though Betty still worked the grill, and the coffee was still strong enough to wake the dead. Camilla moved between tables with practiced ease, but now she wore a simple gold band on her left hand and a smile that never seemed to fade. The struggling waitress from Queens had become Mrs. Augusto Valentino. Though she'd insisted on keeping her job, some things, she'd told her husband, are too important to give up. Augusto sat in their usual corner booth, his white dress shirt open at the collar as always, the wolf tattoo on his neck a reminder of who he'd been before love changed everything. His platinum Rolex caught the afternoon light as he helped 8-year-old Stella with her homework. "Daddy," Stella said, looking up from her math worksheet, "when is the baby coming?" Augusto's hand moved instinctively to Camilla's still flat stomach as she approached their table. 3 months along, and he still couldn't quite believe they were having a baby. 6 more months, princess, he said, pulling Camilla onto his lap with gentle hands. "I hope it's a girl," Stella declared. "Boys are gross." "Hey," Augusto protested with mock offense. "You're not gross, Daddy. You're different." Camilla laughed, the sound filling the diner with warmth. "How is he different?" Stella considered this seriously. "He makes you happy. And when you're happy, I'm happy, and when we're all happy together, it feels like Mommy is happy too." Augusto's throat tightened with emotion. His daughter had found a way to honor her mother's memory while embracing their new life, and it was more than he'd ever dared hope for. "I love you both," he murmured, his arms tightening around his wife. "Forever?" Stella asked, echoing the promise they'd made 2 years ago. "Forever," Camilla and Augusto said in unison, and in that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Augusto Valentino knew he was exactly where he belonged.